Hello and welcome to my YouTube channel. This is going to be my first video. I apologize for the obvious lack of, polish and things like that, but I'm really starting up with nothing. I have no idea what I'm doing, but I've come to the conclusion that I have one voice. I have my voice, and that's it. So it's kind of, at this point my responsibility to use it. So here's my deal. I'll describe sort of a little bit about myself, who I am as a person, and what I where my positions are coming from. So first of all, this is going to be a pro-life channel. My goal and intention here is to bring up ideas about the pro-life movement and sort of counter arguments to some very common pro-choice arguments and some maybe less common ones as well. And again, as I'd mentioned, since I just have my voice, that's the only thing I really have to offer. I feel I kind of have to, in order to do what I can to maybe help people sort of solidify their argumentation, maybe help some people with some questions that they find difficult, or maybe even change some people's minds. I don't know if I'm going to be capable of doing that. Being able to speak would help. But this is all I've got, and I've got to do something. So I'm going to be arguing from a secular position. I would consider myself agnostic. I don't prescribe to any formal religion or belief system, and I'm skeptical of claims of God. I don't feel that they necessarily meet the burden of proof. I prefer not to use or see those argumentations because I find they tend to be detrimental to any cause that they're applied to, right? Because that way that argument is just, can just be dismissed just as easily or even countered in a way that is not beneficial to the debate. And the same would be true for pro-choice arguments as well. For example, if someone were to argue that because of their religion abortion would be permissible and in fact a moral good, you really have no way to argue that aside from citing your own religious beliefs. And since those are by definition non-falsifiable, it really, you're at a standstill. It's just a matter of who believes harder, and I don't think that's a reasonable debate tactic. I would also consider myself more on the left side of the spectrum economically, in that I believe that it is the state's duty as a representation of our society to help support people with financial safety nets, to make sure that people are cared for, and to provide the means to live their lives in a way that is productive, helpful, healthy, and safe. Along those lines, I would support the idea of, free birth control, or, higher access to birth control, means of getting that to people, so that abortion is considered less of a need in the first place. I think that is a great way to approach this sort of issue, is to try to reduce the conditions that cause such a thing in the first place. That's where I'm coming from there. So I'm making this video today with in particular as a response to some recent legislation that has passed in my home state, which allows abortion up until the moment of birth for no reason needed. Abortion is entirely deregulated at this time, and I find that extremely concerning and irresponsible. And I'll go into exactly why that is. And that'll lead into another argument, which we'll be discussing, which is the absolutism of bodily autonomy, which I'm seeing more and more of in pro-choice discourse. So the reason I feel it's irresponsible from a legislative perspective is that, first of all, I should explain the justifications for this ruling. The first justification was that essentially they had a panel of doctors, I believe including abortionists as well, OBGYNs and other things along those lines, who assured the state that they had a strong code of ethics that prevented elective abortions beyond the gestational age of 24 weeks, and that no ethical doctor would perform such a thing, and they would be stripped of their medical practice if they did. However, I feel this is a bad argument because we don't legislate based on the actions of people who are already behaving ethically. That's bad policy, right? There's no ethical business that currently practices child labor in our state either. Does that mean we should decriminalize it because no ethical business would do that under their policy? Secondly, the ethical guidelines could definitely change with the law. Other doctors with other medical opinions or other ethical boards could certainly change their opinion to whatever they want, and it would be perfectly legal under the law. To deregulate is to give absolute authority over this, and frankly, I just don't trust people who have a vested interest in abortion to behave in an ethical way when it comes to this. We will get into why that is in a little bit here when I talk about the absolute right of bodily autonomy argument later. The second reason provided was that it simply doesn't happen in our state, and that is an absolutely laughable argument, because now that you've made it legal, why would you assume that people wouldn't come here explicitly for that reason, or that things wouldn't change now that it's legal? Just like with decriminalizing something like child labor or anything else, really, why would you not expect to see an increase in the incidence of those sort of things now that they're legally permissible? Further, and somewhat hilariously, if you enjoy dark jokes without a punchline, our state has also recently legislated ethical treatment of food waste. Essentially, we are required to compost all food waste, even as private citizens, not just on a corporate level, but every citizen is expected to have a place to compost and to perform that with their food waste. Now, I find it absolutely shocking that the state can legislate ethical treatment for leftovers, but not for unborn humans, especially sentient, viable, and healthy ones. This strikes me as absolutely absurd, and I mean, I can't even believe we're in this place right now. Just the cognitive dissonance that the legislators must be experiencing is incredible. Now, I'm just going to briefly touch on sort of the rights absolutism and what that really is. So, I've been seeing a lot of arguments that are stating essentially, apologies for the COVID hair, it's especially apparent right now. I see a lot of arguments that are essentially stating that a woman should have the right to terminate a pregnancy at any time for any reason up until the moment of birth, specifically because bodily autonomy is a inherent, fundamental, and uninfringible right. I don't think this makes any sense at all. I don't think any right is entirely uninfringible. If you think about property rights, you do have the right to shoot someone who trespasses on your property if they appear to be posing an imminent threat. A lot of states have this standard. If someone threatens your life, you do have a right to take theirs in response before they do, right? If you are taking drugs, you lose your right to bodily autonomy because you will be thrown into a drunk tank or a facility that will help you get sober, right? But you're not legally allowed to put anything you want into your own body. Whether that's right or wrong from, say, like a libertarian perspective is kind of irrelevant. The fact is that we can and do legislate opposing these sort of rights. We have limitations to them, right? Rights kind of require limitations in order to be just. Otherwise, for example, let's take the property law, right? Where if you trespass on someone's property with the intent to do them harm, they can use lethal force to remove you. Now, what if we said we're not going to provide any standards for what that means? What if we're not going to provide any standards at all for how that is implemented? The state's going to stay all the way out of it, just like they did with abortion, right? In that instance, should you be allowed to, for example, shoot someone for merely stepping foot on your property? Should you be allowed to allow someone to enter into your home, then at any point in their entrance or when they're in your home, declare them a trespasser and shoot them, right? Well, obviously, I think we can all agree, absolutely not. That doesn't make any sense, right? But at the same time, someone's right is being infringed if someone is on your property without your consent, right? They are on your land. They are violating your rights to run your property the way you see fit, right? So human rights conflict all the time, and putting one as an absolute standard that can never be violated is really a logical fallacy that we call special pleading. Essentially, what you're doing is you're saying that this one thing that I care about is more important than all other things and is right in all instances, and deserves special treatment just because, right? Bodily autonomy, sure, is definitely a human right, but that doesn't mean that it needs to be an absolute right, and we need to have a conversation about when it is appropriate to apply it and when it's not. Another similar argument would be saying that the right to life should be the preeminent right. And this one I think has even more of a logical basis because life is unique in that it, once taken away, it can never be returned. Life is unique in that it's the right that all other rights rely on. If you don't have the right to life, then your bodily autonomy doesn't matter. Your right to own property doesn't matter. Your right to vote doesn't matter, right? If you can be killed, you can't exercise any of your other rights. So that said, even then, I don't think an absolutist approach is appropriate for life, which is an argument that a lot of pro-choicers bring up fallaciously when they say things like forced organ donations, forced blood donations, right? Using a similar standard to what they're using for bodily autonomy, then yeah, why not? Why not say that life is the primary right and that forced organ donations should be required, that forced blood donations should be required, so on and so forth. And really, once you do that, once you frame the argument in that way, where you have an alternative right that should be uninfringible, and that should be able to be used to violate someone else's rights for any reason at any time, now all you have is essentially a back and forth match of no, my right is more important, right? That's what they'll say in response to you, and that's what you'll say in response to them, and the argument goes nowhere. This is why it's special pleading, and this is why it's a bad argument. And the same thing happens when you're talking about religion as well. I understand there are going to be some religious people here, so you might not necessarily like this argumentation, but it's the same idea, where if you get in a conversation with someone of an opposing religion, your only arguments really boil down to, my God is better because I think so, and the other side saying, well, my God is better because I think so. Really, that's a special pleading argument, and it goes nowhere. Now, I should probably mention that this really works best in the instance of where someone from the opposing side is using this to justify abortion at any stage of pregnancy for any reason, because it's especially egregious when that sort of thing is used to justify the termination of, at least in my opinion, of a fetus that is fully sentient, fully viable, and healthy. However, it could really be applied to the pro-choice argument in general, in the fact that they are using their preferred special pleading right to trample on the right to life, which currently technically is not a right for the fetus, unfortunately, but that doesn't mean that things can't change. So again, if you see someone using this argument, I would strongly encourage pointing out the fact that it is a special pleading argument. You know, give that a shot. So typically, one of the arguments that I see is the idea that a woman should have the right to control her body in any way she sees fit at any time, including the termination of a healthy full-term fetus, right? So it's really the idea of being able to control your body at any time that's the key to this sort of argumentation and what makes it special pleading, right? Being able to have any option at any time for any reason is the special pleading part of this argument. And so again, that would apply directly to, say, laws that allow self-defense for trespassers. Well, if you were to deregulate that completely and have no standard for what self-defense means, why shouldn't you be able to shoot someone who simply steps foot on your property? You, after all, have the right to remove someone from your property, and you should have the right to use any means you see fit, including lethal force, just the same way a pregnant woman according to their argument, should have that right. And that also applies to people that you invite into your home. If you invite them into your home, you can declare them a trespasser at any time, and again, go directly to lethal force if that's what you choose. So that's why this argument is special pleading, right? It allows the supreme autonomy of that right over every other right or any other right. Which is not an appropriate way to deal with this sort of thing. Human rights conflict all the time, and the way we deal with that is by finding reasonable standards and reasonable compromise, not by throwing our hands up and saying, well, just fucking whatever. Typically, I find a couple of paths that happen when you use this form of argumentation. Generally, they are forced to either support the idea that forced organ donations should be legal, or that it should be legal to kill someone for entering your property for any reason, right? You should be able to invite someone in your home and shoot them across the dinner table because now they're a trespasser. Or, which of course now they are using their framework to justify murder, and then you can sort of be like, well, that seems like an extremely unreasonable standard. Or alternatively, sometimes they tend to drop the argument, or other times they'll pick little pedantic bits to argue about in there as well, such as you know, how bodily autonomy is law and the right to life is not, so on and so forth. But typically their argument tends to fall apart directly after that. Right? And again, that's because it's built on fallacious reasoning. Their argument simply cannot stand, so they'll be grasping at straws after the fact. So I'd just like to go ahead and close out the video. I thank you very much for following along, if in fact you were able to. I apologize for the obvious and glaring quality issues, for my, general COVID appearance, and, for generally sucking. I do intend to improve. The direction of the channel, I'm thinking, will be investigating and sort of discussing pro-choice claims with methods of debunking them. I think more from a philosophical side, from a logical side, than necessarily like a deep statistical research side, because most of the statistics are pretty straightforward, pretty well known, and pretty well agreed upon. But for some instances, I may do a little bit more of a deep dive into research. That said, I'm also intending to participate in keeping up with pro-life news, maybe participating in some events. The March for Life would be incredible to get down to and participate in, and report back from that, maybe with footage of the event. That could be something that would be excellent. Again, I don't know. I don't know that I'm going to change the world with this channel, but I mean, one step at a time. Maybe I can grow it into something that can help people, can help change minds, make things a little bit better. Thank you.